Sir, now it is 3 o'clock in India, so we can start. So just I will start the formal introduction and we can start.
Great, thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon to all. I am Dr. Amit Kumar Singh, Head Department of Management, Mizoram University. And I have a pleasure to welcome all of you on this great occasion of international webinar on COVID-19 aviation and tourism, implication for manager and tourism professionals. Taking this opportunity, first and foremost, I would like to welcome our guest of honor and speaker, Professor Andreas Papatheodorou, sir. And our Vice Chancellor, Professor K. Arya Sambhasiv Rao, and Professor Sarma sir, Dr. Rupui, and other participants. First and foremost, I sincere welcome to our honorable speaker, Professor Andreas Papatheodorou sir, and he is expert in the area of transport and tourism economy. Had wide experience of working in 13 universities, more than established in more than 7 countries, and presently he is working as a professor in the University of Agen, Greece, as well as he is adjunct professor in University of New South Wales, which is one of the biggest university and greatest university in the world. Professor Andreas is also adjunct professor in Frankfurt University of Germany. And besides this, Professor Andreas work in London College of Tourism, Nottingham Business School, University of Surrey. And he is a great researcher in the world, well known, especially in the field of tourism economy and transport economy. He published more than 150 research papers in English, and besides that, he published so many research papers in other languages, Greek, French, and German. He known more than 4 languages. And Professor Andreas' citation is more than 5,000. So we can understand that what kind of great researcher he is. And he produced more than 25 PhDs in not only in the Greece, but in 7 countries. Professor Andreas' education, if we will see, so from his very beginning and childhood, he is always gold medalist. And he did his MPhil and PhD from the well-known, well-regarded UK. And Professor Andreas is also very much active in a professional association. If we look, most of the professional bodies of the world in the business and tourism, he is also actively involved in that. Professor Andreas completed more than 30 projects of national and international report, and especially from the European Union and World Bank. So we are so grateful to Professor Andreas that he is such a big personality, and he agreed to deliver lecture for our international webinar. Professor Andreas is not only well-known academics and researcher, but he is very much expert in the classical guitar. And sometimes if we will get an opportunity, he will show us his expertise in guitar also. So I welcome sir on this great occasion of this international webinar. Taking this opportunity, I would like to sincerely welcome our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K. Arya Sambhasiv Rao, who is a great philosopher and scientist. He did his PhD in 3 subjects: biotechnology and pharmaceutical sciences, geology. He is DSc in biotechnology. And Professor Sambhasiv Rao is not only the great scientist, but a great academic leader who always works for the betterment of our university. And he published more than 300 papers in the International Journal Review. And his citation is more than 13,000. So Professor K.R.S. Sambasiv Rao is, and he did his master degree in 6 subjects. So he is not only in biotechnology or life sciences, but he did education in the management and psychology also. And we are also assistant professor in our department and very actively involved in such kind of activities. And would also like to welcome Mr. Suraj, who is providing all kind of the technical support and is very active doing in these things. But my most sincere welcome to the all participants, nearly 1,100 participants, because the success of any program and speaker or organizer depends on the number of the participants. So I sincerely welcome to all the participants on this great occasion of international webinar. Uh, Before inviting Professor Andreas to deliver the lecture, I want to request the participants that they can put the question and answers in the question and answer section. And after the lecture, our Professor L.S. Sharma will handle the question and answer section, and Professor Andreas will answer the questions. So now, sir, I would like to request you to deliver your lecture, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Singh, for your very kind and extensive introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you online, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person at some stage as well. I'll now share my screen so that I can start with my presentation. Okay, so I hope you can see that this is the first slide of my presentation. The title is COVID-19, Aviation and Tourism, Implications for Destinations and Managers of Tourism Enterprises. So first thing I would like to do is to highlight the interdependence that exists between aviation and tourism. I don't know how familiar you are with tourism. It comprises different sectors. Obviously, transport is quite important. And in tourism economics, we have a term called the tourism ratio. So tourism ratio relates to the receipts of a specific sector expressed as a percentage of its total turnover. So when a tourism ratio is over 15% for a particular sector, then that sector is regarded as being part of the tourism industry. So in this context, we can argue that air transport is a par excellence tourism industry because its ratio is over 90%. And please do take into consideration that when we talk about tourism, it's not only leisure tourism, it's also business tourism, it's visiting friends and family, traveling for other reasons as well. And air transport seems to play a very important role in this context. Just to give you some statistics, so obviously these were before the pandemic, but you can get an idea. About 57% of international tourists traveled by air in 2018. That's a big increase compared to the early 1980s, when the percentage was 35%. Also, employment figures are quite important. So the employment effect of air transport on tourism is estimated at being around 15.6 million jobs, and that's only for direct effects. When we consider all the different multiplier effects, meaning indirect, induced, and catalytic effects, then the total effect rises to close to 37 million jobs and close to $900 billion in terms of world GDP. So as you understand, air transport is quite important, and we can actually argue that the demand for air transport is a derived one, meaning people travel not for the sake of flying, they travel to go somewhere and do something. So just because there is demand for tourism for all the different activities that I've just mentioned, there is subsequently demand for air transport. And on these grounds, it's not surprising that both sectors of the economy are highly cyclical. So when the economy is doing well, usually there is an increase in terms of business tourism, leisure tourism, subsequently an increase in demand for air transport. When the economy enters in a recession, it's the opposite. So both sectors are highly cyclical, but they are also sensitive to changes in the social and political environment. So when there is a social unrest, usually tourism goes down, transport goes down. On the other hand, when we reach a status of political detente, usually we see an increase in terms of both tourism and transport. And over the last few years, one of the major themes that has emerged is route development. And so route development is about developing new routes and increasing the level of demand for existing routes. And that's an area where different stakeholders can come together, meaning airlines, airports, and destination managers. So in Europe and elsewhere, we've seen the development of what we call DMOs, destination management organizations, or DDMMOs, which stands for Destination Development Management and Marketing Organizations. So these are organizations in charge of promoting different destinations. And from a tourism point of view, securing accessibility is of essence. So what destinations managers should do in collaboration with local entrepreneurs is to talk to airlines and airports to see how they can jointly promote a destination. So in this context, route development is very important. And I would say that until very recently, the main priority was exactly to increase transport accessibility, but also to somehow deal with the phenomenon of over tourism. So this is a case when a destination ends up exceeding its level of carrying capacity because it has too many visitors. So until very recently, the main theme was promoting tourism, enhancing route development, but at the same time ensuring that destinations do not end up becoming victims of their own success. So until a few months ago, obviously, if you would ask me to deliver a lecture, I would say nothing about the pandemic. I would focus on the relationship between aviation and tourism, talking about sustainability, and also talking about issues such as over-tourism. So here we have a picture from the lovely island of Santorini. It's very well known. It's in Greece, but it's an international destination. It's essentially very, very popular with tourists all over the world. And actually, we get many Chinese tourists as well who go to Santorini to get married or to celebrate the honeymoon, because it's a very romantic island. And as you can see here, we have big queues of people, waiting for the sunset, or waiting just to, enjoy the landscape and the scenery from Ia. Ia is this very famous place on the island of Santorini. And as you may appreciate, the village was not built originally to attract so many tourists. And when you have end up having so many people and so increased tourism flows, then the big issue for the destination is not to become a victim of its own success, to ensure that somehow visitors are properly managed so as to keep people happy. Keeping visitor satisfaction at high levels is important, but at the same time ensuring that all three pillars of sustainability, meaning the economic, social and environmental can be appropriately observed. So until a few months ago, the big issue was how to deal with such problems. And then, as a result of the pandemic, we moved from over tourism to zero tourism. So I'm sure you are familiar with Colosseum in Rome. It's one of the most important landmarks in Europe, at least, I would say in the entire world. So this photo was taken on the 28th of March, when the pandemic was at its highest levels in Italy. And usually, you know, the Colosseum is full of tourists, full of people. And as you can see, it was a deserted place because of the pandemics. And here I have another picture from Taj Mahal from India, and you can see an Indian soldier observing that the quarantine is appropriately observed and that there are no people inside this very famous monument. But I had the great pleasure to visit a few years ago. Within a few months, we went from over tourism to zero tourism, and obviously this is not a phenomenon only for Europe. It's a global phenomenon, I would say. And all of that is very much related to the pandemic, and we can argue that from a business point of view, COVID-19 is like a black swan. So in business economics, we refer to black swans when we end up having events which are very rare, totally unexpected, and end up having big and usually devastating implications for the entire economy, but also, I would say, for the society as well. Now, here I have the latest statistics. This is a screenshot from the WHO that I took yesterday, the World Health Organization. As you can see at the end of the screen below, you can see that it refers to the 30th of July. So yesterday we had about 16.8 million confirmed cases, more than 660,000 deaths, unfortunately. And as you can see, it's a real pandemic. It's a global phenomenon. Many different countries in the world have been severely hit, such as big superpowers like the United States and Russia. And unfortunately, we have a big number of confirmed cases in India as well, close to 1.6 million and about 35,000 deaths. So we all want to ensure that we can somehow deal with this pandemic that has really shaken the world at different levels. Now, obviously, as you may appreciate, dealing with health and safety and making sure that we somehow manage to deal with the pandemic from a medical point of view is top priority. But in our context, what is of essence is what have been the impacts of the pandemic for travel and tourism. And here I show you some statistics produced by IATA. IATA is the International Transport Association, is the most prestigious airline association in the world. So a couple of days ago, they had a very interesting presentation regarding the impact of COVID-19 on the transport sector. And one of the slides referred to travel restrictions that currently exist at a global level. So with the dark blue color, you can see countries where we still have a lot of restrictions, whereas with the lighter one, you can see countries that are partially restricted. And so you can see that most countries in the EU still have a number of restrictions. In countries like Greece, where I live, or in Spain, or in Italy, we try to somehow relax some of these restrictions because tourism is very, very important for us. So if we kept having a totally restrictive policy, that would prove very, very detrimental to our tourism sector and obviously to our entire economy. So the big issue now in many European countries is how to balance restrictions on the one hand, which may be regarded as important from a health and safety point of view, with the very fact that we need the economy to go ahead, and we need tourism to go ahead. So this is the reason why many European countries have lifted some of the restrictions. In some European countries, it's even more liberal regime. So in countries like Serbia or Albania or Ukraine. But again, if you go to Africa, you can see that most countries still have lots of restrictions. Egypt is relatively liberal. Again, this relates to the fact that Egypt depends very heavily on tourism, like Mexico, for example, a similar kind of story, whereas US and Canada are like India, China, and the Russian Federation, so partially restricted. And obviously, the big question now is whether we will gradually see a further relaxation of the different restrictions, or whether we will end up having a second wave of the pandemic, which will be bad news, as we would have to move back to a new round of lockdowns and possibly to a new level of restrictions. Now, here we see statistics coming from the UNWTO. That stands for the United Nations World Tourism Organization. And here you can see bookings made for international travel by departure region from the very early days of this year until today. And as you can see, statistics are really devastating for all different regions of the world. So for Africa and Middle East, we have experienced a reduction of about 85%, whereas in Europe, Americas, it's close to 96, 97%. And for Asia Pacific is more than 100%, which is bizarre. How can you ever have a decline which exceeds 100%? But as it's shown on the footnote here, percentage declines larger than 100% reflect more cancellations than new bookings. So not surprising, as you know, the pandemic started in China and then started spreading all over the world. So even in early to mid-January, we've seen more cancellations than new bookings in Asia Pacific. Until that time, it was sort of okay. Let's say the situation was sort of under control in Europe and the Americas, but then the situation started deteriorating sharply in February and March. And from late March onwards, we started getting a bit better. But this getting better is obviously just relative, because as I told you, until almost today, meaning from the 6th of January until the 19th of July, at a global level, we've seen bookings going down by 99%. That's absolutely detrimental, as you can appreciate. Now, these are some statistics that have been produced by the UNWTO again, and they show the evolution of international tourism arrivals over the last 20 years. And generally speaking, we can say that tourism has proved resilient to different misfortunes. So back in 2003, we had the problem with SARS, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, which was, let's say, the predecessor of the COVID-19. Okay, that was bad news, but obviously the impact was not that big because it was not a pandemic. It was predominantly located in Southeast Asia, and predominantly, I would say, in Hong Kong and China. Then we saw the adverse effect of the 2009 global economic crisis that resulted in 37 million people fewer in terms of international tourism arrivals, which amounted to a reduction of close to 4%. But from then onwards, the future was bright, and until 2019, the upward trend was somewhat unstoppable. So from 674 million international tourist arrivals in 2000, we ended up recording about 1,462 in 2019. That was the estimate for 2019. And then because of the pandemic, everything collapsed. And recently, the UNWTO came up with 3 different scenarios. The first scenario, which is the more optimist, says that 2020 will end up recording a reduction which would amount to 850 million people. That's 58%. So in that case, we would end up having about 610 million people, meaning that the last 20 years would be just erased. We would go to numbers experienced in the late 1990s. The most pessimistic scenario number 3, is that we're going to record a reduction of 78%, more than 1.1 billion international tourist arrivals. So that would take us to 320 million people, numbers that we had experienced, I would say, in the early 90s. So going back almost 30 years. And scenario B is in the middle, I would say. So expected reduction of close to 70%, slightly more than 1 billion international tourism arrivals. And here I have another graph, again coming from the UNWTO, but this time it's not for arrivals, it's for receipts. And as you can see, the impact of the global economic crisis in 2009 was important. It resulted in a loss of 88 billion US dollars, 5.4% in real terms. But obviously, that's nothing compared to what is expected today. So according to the, let's say, a relatively optimist scenario, the world tourism industry will lose about $910 billion, amounting to approximately 62%. Under the most pessimist scenario, we will experience a decrease of 1.17 billion dollars. That's the expected loss, which is about 80% reduction compared to the previous year. And scenario B relates to experience by the tourism sector in the mid or even in the early 90s, I would say. Now here I have the results of the UNWTO Barometer that was published a few days hemisphering in your destination, and whether it's doing better or worse compared to the previous quarter or compared to the previous year, or what is going to happen in the following year. But obviously, as you may appreciate, the top priority now is to ask questions regarding the pandemic. So here you can see the latest views as expressed by the UNWTO panel of experts regarding different questions. So first question is, when do you think international tourism will recover? And as you can see, most people in Asia Pacific, and especially in Africa, and followed by Americas and Europe. So basically, I'm referring to this pink kind of color. The keep saying that tourism will recover by the end of 2021. In the Middle East, there are also people who are much more optimistic, and they say that things will recover by the first quarter of 2021. And when we have questions regarding domestic tourism, usually people tend to believe that domestic tourism will recover sooner than international tourism, and that's because usually domestic travel restrictions are less serious compared to international travel restrictions. So if we go down to the right, you can see the question, when do you think international domestic tourism will recover? And as you can see, most experts argued that domestic tourism will start recovering earlier than international tourism. And then we have questions related to different types of measures. So, for example, what types of measures are being implemented by your destination to restart tourism? So we see things like emphasis on domestic tourism. A number of countries, for example, have introduced vouchers, travel vouchers that are given to the local population in order to boost domestic tourism, just because international tourism is not there. Having said that, if we go to the right, we can see that most experts believe that domestic tourism can only partially, or even they are negative in terms of whether domestic tourism can actually compensate for the temporary drop in international tourism. And the reason for that is that first of all, it's a matter of numbers, meaning in countries like Greece, for example, international tourism is far more important for domestic tourism. So even if a country has given travel vouchers, this is not sufficient. And then we have to remember that as a result of the big recession that has come, as a result of COVID-19, because of unemployment, loss of jobs, and so on and so on, domestic tourism cannot prove sufficient. In any case, many countries have decided to somehow take measures to boost domestic tourism to the most to the extent that this is possible. Then we've seen the development of new safety and hygiene protocols. These are about instigating a sense of confidence, boosting confidence among travelers, lifting of travel restrictions, flights, resumption, and so on. But again, don't expect that all these measures will immediately prove active and successful. It takes time, and the most important thing right now is to somehow ensure that we will not end up having a second wave of pandemic, which unfortunately seems to be the case already in a number of countries, because in that case, obviously, travel confidence would go down and devastating effects would prevail. Now, in terms of stimulus policies, a number of countries have already introduced expansionary monetary and fiscal policies that's seen, for example, quite extensively in Europe and in the US, elsewhere as well. Other countries have also followed different employment policies in terms of protecting people from a furlough or from becoming unemployed. And we've also seen other more private sector oriented policies, including market intelligence and promotion as well. Okay, so I gave you some statistics regarding tourism, and the big and rather unsurprising conclusion is that tourism flows have essentially collapsed at different levels, at both global and domestic level, and not surprisingly, this had devastating effects on air travel as well. Now here I have a graph which shows a big picture of travel. This graph comes from ICAO. ICAO is the International Civil Aviation Organization, and shows the evolution of passenger traffic between 1945 until today. And basically, the big conclusion here is that until last year, air transport had proved very resilient. I mean, from time to time, we do experience problems. So we had the oil crisis in the early 1970s, the war in Iraq, between Iraq and Iran in the early 1980s, Gulf crisis in the early 1990s, the big financial crisis in Asia in the late 1990s, the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington in 2001, SARS, financial crisis. So different crises, either of economic nature or wars or terrorist attacks. So from time to time, yes, we've seen some drops in terms of passenger traffic, but if we look at the big picture, it appears as if air travel has recorded a kind of an exponential growth since the mid-1940s, since the end of the Second World War. Having said that, if we look at what has been the result of COVID-19, we're talking about something which has never experienced before by the civil aviation sector. So ICAO expects that declines will be between 35 and 65%, depending on the scenario that we're going to consider. And again, this is not a phenomenon only for Europe or for Asia Pacific. It's a global phenomenon. So here you can see the different regions of the world where it's evident that both passenger traffic and revenue has collapsed. And for these reasons, most airlines have decided to drastically cut their capacity. So as you can see, in Asia Pacific, for example, capacity reductions range between 38 to 70%. That's what is expected for the entire year. And according to ICAO forecast, again, we expect a passenger drop between 237 million to 414 million, and a revenue loss which would be between 50 and 85 billion dollars. But again, similar levels of percentage reductions are expected throughout the world, not only in Asia Pacific, where the pandemic started, but I would say in Europe, North America, Latin America, and so on. And obviously, these are just different estimates, and depending on different types of forecasting and whether we consider a more optimist scenario, let's say, or a more pessimist scenario. And again, it's not only a matter of considering international passenger traffic. ICAO believes, and I'm in full agreement with this opinion, but domestic passenger traffic is also expected to suffer, possibly not to the extent of drops that we're going to see in terms of international passenger traffic, but still quite important. So if I go back to my previous slide, you can see that in terms of international passenger traffic, capacity is expected to go down between 38 and 70% in Asia Pacific. If we talk about domestic passenger traffic, capacity is expected to go down between 28 and 50%. Again, if we consider revenue loss for in terms of international passenger traffic is expected to be between 50 and 86 billion dollars for Asia Pacific. If we look at the domestic market, it's expected to be between 32 and 56. So that relates to what we said earlier about international tourism versus domestic tourism, meaning both are expected to suffer, but domestic tourism in relative terms only is expected to fare slightly better compared to international tourism. Now, this graph comes from IATA, that I mentioned earlier, the International Air Transport Association, and it refers to load factors. So the load factor shows you whether an aircraft is empty or full. So if you have 100% load factor, it means that the aircraft is full, so all seats are occupied. If you have a 0% load factor, it means that your aircraft is entirely empty. And at present, for most countries and regions of the world, load factors remain at record lows. So as you can see here, we have the latest statistics coming from June 2020. And in most cases, the blue dot corresponds and coincides to the all-time low dot, which is with the gray color. The only exception, I would say, is Latin America, but now with all things happening in Brazil, I don't know whether this will be the case also for July 2020. And I would say that the only market that has currently managed to somehow recover is the domestic Chinese market. So as you can see, last month, the load factor was close to 70%, whereas the all-time low for a June time, for a June period, was some time ago, and that was slightly above 50%. And so again, load factors remain at record lows, and this is obviously very, very bad news for airlines. I mean, IATA also produced this graph a couple of days ago to show that recovery at a global level may prove slow and possibly painful. So with the blue line here, you can see the pre-COVID-19 baseline, and everybody expected that things would go well and that 2020 would be a very good year, followed by an unstoppable trend for the years to come. But as a result of the pandemic, all these trends have now been revised. So we're currently experiencing a big drop, as you can see. So the new baseline is shown here, and according to this new baseline, 2019 levels will be reached again in 2024. So it will take 4 years before we end up seeing traffic levels that we had last year in 2019. And again, remember that this is the new baseline. There is a bit of an optimist scenario, but in terms of the range of the uncertainty, this goes much further down. So you might say that if we end up having a really bad scenario, by 2024, we will be back to levels experienced in 2010 or 2011. Unfortunately, there is still a very, very big range of uncertainty present. So uncertainty, I would say, is a big word now. Uncertainty surrounding the outlook of the transport sector. Now, usually we say that air transport has proved very resilient in the medium to long term. So unless, we end up having a second very, very aggressive wave of the pandemic, we should be in a position to somehow start getting back to a kind of a new normality by 2022 and reaching 2019 levels in 2024. Having said that, we are all expecting that this new normality will be associated with extra safety and hygiene measures, and this should be somehow embedded into the entire transport business ecosystem, just as it was the case with all security measures that was introduced post 9/11 across the world. And just want to make a note here that I visited India twice, and I was really, really impressed by the security levels that were observed at Indian airports. And I had to go through quite a painful process, I would say, but I understand that this was regarded as highly important. So, security measures have been, reached new heights since 2001. Now, this has been taken for granted over the last 20 years. It has been embedded into the normality, let's say, of the air transport business ecosystem, and most probably we will see something similar in terms of extra safety and hygiene measures. So obviously, wearing masks or washing our hands all the time, or going through a COVID test and so on. Now it's a new kind of reality, and nobody wants to accept it. But perhaps in 2 or 3 years, all these things will be somehow embedded into the new normality and be somehow streamlined as well. Now, what I would say that matters in the immediate to short term is to somehow gain back passenger confidence. It's not going to be easy, because many people are very reluctant or even afraid to start flying again. So for this reason, airlines, but I would say also airports, other stakeholders in the transport sector need to somehow rethink the strategies. They would have to introduce very concrete safety and hygiene protocols in order to boost back confidence. But having said that, the future is not very bright. I mean, COVID-19 has caused, as you understand, big damage on the economy. The economy is going to enter into a recession. Okay, fiscal and monetary policies can help, but up to a certain extent. And so that means that to set their operations on a longer term sustainable track, what airlines and other stakeholders in the business ecosystem need to do is they need to find new ways to boost the revenue, but at the same time, new ways to reduce their costs. So all this is quite important, but again, because of uncertainty, there are lots of question marks, and I'm afraid I don't have the answer to this question, and I don't think that somebody does. So how long will the pandemic last? What will be the severity levels? How deep and how long the global recession is going to be? Are we going to experience a kind of a V turn, which is more or less experienced by stock exchange markets around the world, or are we going to see a kind of a U-shaped recovery, or are we going to see a kind of a W? And many analysts keep saying now that there is a kind of a decoupling between what's experienced by stock exchange markets, which have to some extent recovered a lot since February and March, and what is the actual state of the real economy. And obviously, this decoupling cannot go ahead forever. At some stage, we would either need to see a proper recovery of the real economy, or otherwise stock exchange markets may suffer from a substantial correction. So again, that's a big question mark. Then how long will lockdowns and travel restrictions continue? How fast will consumer confidence in travel be restored? And sector-wise, a big question is how long will airlines be in a position to withstand the current financial adversity? And we've seen in Europe, for example, that many governments have decided to intervene. So Air France, for example, has received about 7 billion euros from the French state as a kind of a state aid under certain circumstances, and with various measures and strings attached to that as well. And so it's not just that Air France gets money for free, and they have to abide by a number of different new rules and conditions they need to meet a number of different terms and conditions. So if we look at Lufthansa, again, they are in negotiations with the German government, or Alitalia has been renationalized by the Italian government. So this is a big issue, and I would say it's not only an issue in Europe. We've seen that a number of airlines in the United States have received financial support from the states. Whereas if we look in Asia Pacific, we have different kinds of approaches. And so if you look in Thailand, for example, Thailand depends on tourism a lot, yet Thai Airways had to file for bankruptcy, I think, because they were in a really bad shape. And that's not only for Thai Airways, a number of other airlines around the Asia Pacific region do face important issues. And again, we need to consider whether the air transport industry can withstand this adversity and for how long. And as we said in the very beginning of this presentation, air transport and tourism go together. So that means that destination managers should work closely with transport stakeholders to secure that we somehow create a kind of a new path, create a kind of a new roadmap in order to promote travel and tourism. But all these steps have to be cautious steps and careful steps. Otherwise, we may end up suffering from a second wave of the pandemic. And I would say that the term sustainable tourist development that was first coined in the late 1980s, early 1990s, has now gained new meaning because of all the different implications of the pandemic. So I'm sure you are familiar with the concept of social distancing. So if social distancing is going to remain for a while, it means that destinations would have to accept fewer tourists. So if they are to make money from fewer tourists, they would have to rethink about the entire business model, how to make more money with fewer tourists, essentially how to increase per capita tourism expenditure. So that takes me to the next and final slide of my presentation, meaning recommendations for destinations and managers. So as a result of the pandemic, we may see that mass tourism might become more expensive. And why is it so? Well, first of all, we will see the introduction of new measures, safety and hygiene measures, that will increase the cost base. So obviously the entire product, tourism product, will become more expensive, whether we talk about travel or whether we talk about hotel accommodation or other parts of the tourism sector. And not only total costs will go up in terms of considering these things, unit costs may also go up. And why is it so? Because as a result of institutional constraints in terms of travel restrictions and so on, destinations will have to accept fewer tourists. So if on the one hand you see an increase in terms of the cost structure and base, if on the other hand you see fewer tourists, then that means that you can no longer rely on reduce your unit costs at the levels experienced in the past. So mass tourism may become more expensive, and mass tourism has been quite an important pillar of development for many countries in Europe and elsewhere that have traditionally relied on what we call sea and sun product. So sea and sun product very much related to mass tourism. In India, for example, Goa is a place where you would experience something similar. So again, if you end up having all these new constraints, mass tourism will become more expensive, this may prove to what we call the loss of the democratization of tourism, which since the Second World War has been a major pillar and a major narrative. But again, we have to consider that safety comes first. Now, on top of that, we need to consider implications for tourism service providers. As a result, the big challenge now is that hotels, airlines, other parts of industry, they may have to restructure the revenue management model. And why is it so? Because they need to achieve higher yields with fewer customers. And at present, this is obviously impossible because, as I said, now airlines, hotels, everybody is trying to gain back tourists. And not surprisingly, they're trying to lure tourists by reducing the prices. And this is standard textbook economics and marketing strategy. But if you reduce your prices, and if on the other hand, you end up having higher costs, this will be a perfect recipe for a financial loss and eventually for a bankruptcy as well. So at some stage, I think that if tourism service providers are to remain on business, they would have to restructure the business model. And if social distancing becomes a new normality, then the big thing is how you can achieve high yields with fewer customers. And that's not easy because if you are to increase your prices, you need to sell a good narrative as well. So one of the narratives would be that, okay, we increase our prices because we have embedded all these new safety and hygiene measures. But on top of that, if you are to increase your prices substantially, you still have to show that the value for money ratio is good. So if people pay more money, they will also be more demanding from the different tourism service providers. So that means that something needs to be done there as well. Again, at the level of destinations, some destinations would have to work with other tourism service providers in order to rebrand themselves, in order to sell constraints on the number of tourists. And traditionally, destinations had been reluctant to impose constraints on tourists because they thought that people would be unhappy, or they thought that accommodation providers or airlines would be very unhappy about that. But now we have a new normality, and it may prove more legitimate and easier to have such constraints. And from a destination point of view, we also need to put a lot of emphasis on new health-related infrastructure investment. That has to grow for sure if we are to promote tourism on a sustainable basis. Again, I keep repeating that safety comes first, and if we want to build confidence, showing that our destinations are well endowed in terms of health-related infrastructure is quite important. And then we have sectors associated with tourism, such as construction and travel insurance. Again, a big issue for them there. If you talk about travel insurance, a big issue is whether pandemics and suffering as a result of the pandemic is covered or not. So if somebody ends up getting contaminated and by COVID-19, are they going to be covered by the travel insurance or not? What we've seen now is that a number of countries, at least in Europe, who rely very heavily on tourism, said that if tourists come to, let's say, Cyprus or even Greece, and they end up catching COVID-19 disease, the Greek state or the Cypriot state or other states in Europe, they would take care of these tourists. So states would intervene to offer a kind of insurance in that case. But this is not all over the world, and as you can appreciate, there are different exemptions from that, and it's not only a matter of state intervention, it's a matter of how the industry the travel insurance industry is going to respond to this new challenge, not only now, but in the years to come. Or if you think about construction companies building hotels and other types of infrastructure, they may have to reconfigure the way that we're building hotels or airport terminals or other types of infrastructure. And not surprisingly, this will also have important implications for banks and other financial institutions that are there to finance the construction of hotels, of airports, and so on. Just to give you an example, in Greece, we have a major concession, Fraport. Fraport is a big multinational airport management company based in Germany. And a few years ago, they established Fraport Greece, and Fraport Greece is in charge of managing 14 airports in Greece. And they had to reach an agreement with the government in terms of how things will progress now because of the pandemic and the collapse of the airport business and travel business in general. Or in India, you have a very big conglomerate, GMR, but is also active in Greece, and GMR is also in charge of airport management. Again, GMR has close links to the banking sector. As a result of the pandemic, all these relationships would have to be readapted and take into consideration the new normality. And the last point I would like to make is about fear and protectionism. And this can be really, really bad because it may hit the tourism sector recovery. So I don't know if you follow the news in Europe, but a few days ago, the United Kingdom decided to issue new travel advice and reintroduce quarantine with respect to visitors from the UK to Spain. And in case you don't know, Spain depends a lot on tourism in general and a lot of on British travelers in particular. So as a result of that, there was a very big diplomatic let's say, conflict between Britain and Spain over the last few days. Again, protectionism relates to what we call staycation. Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, now keeps telling British people that it might be easier and safer to go to Cornwall, for example, instead of flying in other countries. So again, staycation, which is a term developed 10 years ago to say that people will stay close to home and not traveling abroad. It was developed 10 years ago because of a recession, but now it has re-emerged, not only because of a recession, but predominantly because of safety and hygiene issues and all these travel restriction issues. So again, we might see a kind of travel protectionism developing. Also, economic history has shown that in periods of economic recessions, we don't have the necessary and the very much needed global responses. Different countries ended up reaching solutions that are just good for their own sake. And so instead of having a global solution, we end up having a very fragmented response. This is exactly what we've seen over the last few months. Every single country ended up having its own policy. Fair enough to some extent, because the pandemic has evolved in different ways in different countries. But unless we somehow seek a global solution in terms of safety and hygiene, but also in terms of the economy, I'm afraid that this new spirit of fear and possibly all these new voices of protectionism may hit recovery. So I think that somehow policymakers should orchestrate their efforts globally so that recovery may emerge sooner than later. So that's all from me. Thank you very much. Here are my details. You can visit my personal websites to learn more information about me, and my profile is also available on different social media, including Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, ResearchGate, Academia. I also have my own channel on YouTube, and you are most welcome to connect with me in different ways. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Yes. Respected sir, thanks for your very informative and encouraging lecture. Now, I would like to invite our Honorable Vice Chancellor, great scientist, philosopher, and a visionary leader to say a few words. Yes, now VC, sir.
Thank you very much, Andreas. It is excellent presentation. I'm very happy to see you and your presentation. So really, aviation industry you are taken in example, but what about other sectors of in industry like tourism and tourism hotels and markets, business, international markets, everything, total social conditions of the people totally affected because of one particular situation. And nobody can move from one place to other place. Aviation sector actually has taken one particular stand to go for other places where they can go, they can shift the travel from one place to other place, but carriages. But other industries also collapsed. What do you opinion that what total your survey analysis shares any economic decline in all the countries? How it is going to pop up in the next few months? You have any idea about that? I just wanted to hear from your point of view. I have something in your mind, but still I wanted to know from your point of view.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this introduction and for this question. I fully agree with you that economic times ahead of us are going to be very difficult, and we have to consider that tourism is only one of the sectors hit by the pandemic. Agriculture has been extensively hit. Just to give you an example, I'm sure you're familiar with Florida in the United States. Florida relies a lot not only on tourism but also on agriculture, and in particular on oranges. And the big problem in Florida a few months ago is that some Mexican workers were not allowed to go to Florida to pick up the oranges from the trees and produce juice and so on. So this is just an example of how the agriculture supply chain has been disrupted. Same case with the meat sector as well, and definitely with many other sectors of the economy, either directly or indirectly. So, for example, in Greece, tourism accounts for about 20% of our GDP. So just because tourism has collapsed, we expect to have a recession of about 10% on a year-to-year basis. And obviously, if there is no money around, just to put it in plain terms, not only tourism will suffer, but everybody else who indirectly or in an induced way depends on tourism. That's what we call the multiplier effect in the economy. I would say that the only a few sectors that have somehow managed to do well over the pandemic is, first of all, everything that relates to e-commerce. So we've seen that Amazon, for example, has fared very well over the pandemic. Its share price has gone up a lot. Same case with Tesla, for example, the electric car maker. A number of airlines that focus on cargo, they have managed to do sort of well because on the one hand, they have suffered from the recession, but on the other hand, there was lots of need for cargo movements around the world in terms of health and safety related material. But the great majority of sectors have suffered. expansionary fiscal and monetary policies have sort of helped, but as I said, this is not the real medicine. We have to finish with the pandemic before we somehow manage to move forwards on a sustainable path.
Actually, I agree with you, sir. One point I'm really surprised. The very important farmers are not going to be affected. What about available to food grains? Food grains actually depending on that. If the situation is what available to food?
I'm afraid I can't hear you. I'm afraid I can't hear you very well. Could you please repeat the question, because there's been a technical issue?
Oh, okay. Shall I repeat the question?
Yes, please, please.
No, I'm afraid, Professor, the situation, if it is continued, the availability of food.
Yes,
to many countries, because the situation in agriculture activity, nutrition will be not possible, and food grains will not be. People cannot eat anything. What is going to happen? In many countries, they are not able to anything. What is the situation? We are talking about several basic needs also going to be affected.
I think you're absolutely right. So as I said earlier, we might experience disruptions in the food chains as well. So I mean, the example of oranges I gave you is important, but if you consider grains, for example, it might be much more important. And a big issue I think that we might face is a wave of famine in developing countries because of all these disruptions. So if people cannot go and undertake the proper agricultural activities that they have to, we may end up seeing a sharp reduction in agricultural production. We might see food prices going up substantially, and obviously poorer people might suffer a lot out of that. So again, I think that there should be some proper level of intervention there to secure that we don't end up having not only a second wave of pandemic, but a wave of famine.
Yes, I don't want to take much because other participants may be having some doubts. Thank you very much. We thank you very much for giving excellent presentation. It was really very nice and eye-watching for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Respected Vice Chancellor, sir, we are so thankful for your encouragement, blessing. And now I would like to request Professor L.S. Sharma, sir, to handle the questions and answers session. Sharma, sir.
Hello, thank you very much, Dr. Amit Kumar Singh. Actually, Department of Management.
Sorry, I'm afraid I can't hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks, which has been gathered out here. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can see you, but I can't hear you very well.
Okay, so okay, let me just come to the other side. I do have around 11 questions out here. We'll try to pick it up as one by one. Some of the questions already has been answered. Say, for example, there is one question from Mr. Majid Alam. The question is about how can we make safe tourism in COVID situation? I believe this question has been already taken up, so we'll not take this up. The second question that is coming in from Himanshi Sharma. The question is, In India, most of the hotspots generally happen in the metros. Most of the metro cities, Delhi, Mumbai, and Chennai, and so on. So, what are the possibilities to overcome this fear about going into the metros in the near future, and how can we restore faith in this industry?
Mhm. Thank you for that. Again, I think it's a matter of appropriate intervention at a state level and also at a regional level. So making sure that some safety and hygiene protocols are not only observed in tourist spots, but all over the country, and especially in big metropolitan areas. So just to give you an example, a few days ago, the Greek government decided to introduce new measures making compulsory for people to wear a mask when they enter into a public place. So the idea is to ensure that increase safety and hygiene protocols around in order to deal with issues that might emerge, especially in congested public places. Other than that, I know it's quite difficult. I've been once to Mumbai. I know it's a congested place. Obviously, you cannot ask people to leave the city and go to the countryside. Okay, some people might decide to do that, but not everybody is willing or can afford to do that. So I think that the most important thing is to find ways to help people with health and safety protocols, and possibly in the medium to long term emphasize issues such as teleworking. So if you look at the United States, for example, where most households have access to high-speed internet, people were able to work from home. I know that's not the case throughout India, but perhaps this is a good opportunity for governments and state government, regional governments to invest in this kind of infrastructure, so as to reduce work-related movements in metro areas as much as possible. I'm not going to say that this is going to happen immediately, but this might become one of the top priorities in the months to come.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, there is another question which is related with the travel industry. This one is coming from Lavanya Kalyani. The question is, will the cost of travel increase in the near future?
Yeah, again, that's a big question. So as I said, there are different trends. On the one hand, travel providers are currently trying to lure travelers by lowering the prices. But I think this is not sustainable because, as I said, load factors are low. Same case with hotels, and the cost base has already gone up. So, okay, that might be a kind of a short-term thing, but I think in the medium to long term, just because all these new types of safety and hygiene measures have to be somehow introduced into the system, this will increase the cost base, and as a result, it will also increase the cost of travel. Now, what will be the final impact on price will also depend on the level of competition. Just to give you an example, since the early 2000s, we've seen a rapid rise of airport fees. And in some cases, this rise in airport fees was associated with the measures that had to be introduced by airports in terms of added layers of security. But at the same time, we've seen the introduction of low-cost carriers. So, for example, in India, you have Indigo, which is a very successful low-cost carrier, and these low-cost carriers have brought the price of travel down. Now, obviously, that means that the profit margin might go down. So you would have to rely on scale if you want to be profitable. So in a nutshell, I think that the cost will go up because of all these added measures. In case competition proves healthy, prices might be kept at a sort of satisfactory level. But again, we have to make sure that profitability of airlines will still be there, because otherwise they might go bankrupt. On the other hand, in hyper competitive markets where profit margins are already very, very thin, we may end up seeing higher prices just because this will be the only way for airlines not to lose money.
Okay. So in fact, there was the airlines was thinking about, there was one strategy which they were thinking about having a distance of 1 meter and leaving out the middle seat free and so on. But somehow finally they didn't take up that strategy also.
Exactly, because they cannot afford to do that.
Yes, certainly. Okay, let me come to another question. This question is related to Greece. This has come from Professor Tehangshu Shekhar Chanda. And the question is, what will be the condition of tourism economy in Greece compared to another country in Europe if the COVID-19 situation continues for more than another 6 months?
Okay, Greece has managed the COVID-19 crisis quite well, I would say, from a health and safety point of view, and we were commended by the European Union on how we managed the whole crisis. Having said that, tourism in Greece is a very important part of the economy. So a couple of months ago, we started easing travel restrictions, and big now is how to balance travel restrictions and the need to boost our inbound tourism. And unfortunately, over the last few days, we've seen an increase of new COVID-19 cases again. Still, we are at quite low levels compared to other European countries. However, everyone in Greece is in a state of alert so as not to lose what we managed to achieve over the last few months. So balancing is a big challenge now. And on the other hand, it's for sure that 2020 is going to be a bad year for our tourism. I mean, my personal opinion is that if we end up having about a third of the receipts and arrivals we had last year, we would have to be very satisfied with that. Now, recession in Greece is already here, and government expects that at a yearly level, recession would reach about 10%. And I think our emphasis now is how to avoid a big second wave of the pandemic and ensuring that people will return to Greece in 2021. And from a marketing and branding point of view, the idea is to capitalize on the image of the country as a safe country for tourism, so as to boost international tourism in the years to come.
So just like in recent weeks, I think there were a lot of tourists from Britain going to Spain, and they had to be again, cancel their tours, and because suddenly there was a spurt of COVID-19 in Spain again.
Absolutely, you're right. And as I said during my presentation, there was a diplomatic conflict between Spain and the UK about the decision, because it may have a devastating effect on the travel and hotel sector of Spain.
Okay. So the next question that I have picked up is related to the academic discipline. It looks like coming out from one of the student, Somaya Deep Das. The question is, shall I still go for master's program in tourism despite this pandemic situation?
Great question. And I'm also directing our master's program in our university, and we had a big discussion with our faculty about that. And I would say yes, because, okay, don't expect that things will recover fully in the next couple of years, but studying is like an investment. It's about how you see yourself not in the immediate future, but also in the years and the decades to come. So unless, we end up reaching the end of the world, and I hope we won't. I'm sure that, we will gradually get back to normality in a few years' time. So, if somebody decides to do a master's degree in tourism now, they might not get a top job as soon as they graduate. They might even remain out of the market for a while until the industry starts picking up. But eventually, I think that doing a degree in travel and tourism will definitely pay its investment. Now we have to see it not as a very short-term kind of investment, but something which is for the medium to longer term.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is again from Professor Snehangshu Shekhar Chanda. This is more related with the government policies. The question is, should the government protect the business sector in tourism during this pandemic situation? And what kind of assistance should be given to those who are employed in this sector?
Okay, so first of all, we have, let's say, policies at a state level. I referred to fiscal and monetary policies earlier. Then I think it's a matter of sectoral policies, which may be related to employment. So it's about protecting people from furlough or from being made redundant. Then it's a matter of helping tourism businesses get the necessary know-how in terms of how to implement all these safety and health measures. And I think that's quite important because all over the world, we do have big multinational hotel chains, but may find it, let's say, relatively easy to implement the new protocols because they have the staff and the know-how. But if we look at the market structure of the tourism sector, it's dominated by small and medium enterprises. And these people, they usually don't have the necessary expertise. So I think that one of the big issues here is how to train employees in the travel and tourism industry, first of all, to protect themselves, and then to properly implement all these safety and health-related protocols to the benefit of passengers or to the benefit of hotel customers.
Okay. All right. So I'll just take up the last question. This question is more related to research. This has come from Mr. Tariq Ahmad Lone. The question is it possible to conduct a comparative study in tourism between two regions which are not similar in terms of climate, political, or geographical characteristics? The question is, if it's yes, how can it be conducted? Or if it's no, then what are the reasons behind that?
Okay, well, generally speaking, it's difficult, let's say, to compare, as we say, apples with oranges. Having said that, it's also important to find a common denominator. So in economics, for example, we use econometric analysis and specific type of analysis related to what we call benchmarking analysis using tools like stochastic frontier analysis or data envelopment analysis. The idea is to find a common denominator and then based on these trends to see whether destinations fare better or worse. So again, if you want to do a proper comparative analysis, you would need to have access to different type of statistics and obviously make sure that you incorporate them appropriately into your econometric model. Otherwise, you may end up getting spurious results that would not make much sense.
Okay. So then, thank you for the wonderful interaction. It has been really, really wonderful, and it was quite, expanding our minds also. And let us do hopes that the black swan that you have talked about, we don't have more of black swans as in the future also. So once again, thank you very much. Wonderful interaction.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you online, and looking forward to meeting you in person, hopefully at some stage as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Sharma. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Lal Rupui for a formal vote of thanks. Mr. Rupui.
Hello, sir. I will
Hello.
just take a very small time for proposing a formal vote of thanks. From the organizer side, we would like to give you a ton of thanks for accepting to be the speaker today. Your lesson was very, very informative, and you have bring forth the worldwide statistics. I do hope all the participants are benefiting from your lecture, sir. And also thank you for bringing forth the strategy and the recommendations for the tourism industry. And it was very, very enlightening, and it was a beautiful session. So we do hope to hear from you later on also in the future. And
Thank you very much.
Yes, I would also like to propose a vote of thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor KRS Ambasivarao, for his constant support for these kind of academic activities. Thank you, sir. And also, I would like to propose a vote of thanks to Dr. Amit Kumar Singh, who is our head of the department and who is also our one of the panelists, for his support and his guidance and bringing successfully of this kind of webinar. Thank you, Sir Amit. And also, I would like to propose a vote of thanks to Professor L.S. Sharma for his support and handling the question and answer sessions very well. And also, I would like to give a ton of thanks to our engineer, Suraj, for his technical support. And last but not the least, all the participants without whom this webinar could not be a success. And I do hope that all the participants are keeping in touch with us, with the Department of Management. And we would like to give out the e-certificates to all the audiences and all the participants today. Sir, thank you so much again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir, for your very informative and valuable lectures. And we will meet again in Mizoram or in Greece. Yes, thank you.
Looking forward. Looking forward. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye, sir.